Hello, I'm Jennifer Romanecki, President and CEO of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, and I'm happy to welcome you to this special lecture, Newtown Alive Conversations, presented by Vicki Oldham. I hope that you and your loved ones are staying healthy and safe during this unprecedented time. While I wish I was greeting each of you in person, it is my pleasure to have you join us virtually for this program, which builds upon last year's conversation. In October 2019, this lecture launched an oral history project to record the histories of the families of the household staff that worked and lived on the property of what is today the downtown Sarasota campus of Selby Gardens. Today, you will hear from 4 individuals from the Newtown community about their experiences on the Selby property before it opened to the public in 1975. We are committed at Selby Gardens to being a place of respite for the entire community, especially during these challenging times. Through initiatives such as school tours, teacher training, the Family Togetherness Program, and the My Garden membership program, we connect to the community through the school system and youth service organizations to ensure that all families are welcome at all times to learn, play, and explore at Selby Gardens. We are planning much more in the year ahead with a new exhibition in summer 2021 featuring the artwork of the Florida Highwaymen, a partnership with Sarasota African American Cultural Coalition. Stay tuned for more on this exciting project. And now I would like to introduce Vicki Oldham, founder of Newtown Alive and president of the Sarasota African American Cultural Coalition, as well as Jeannie Perales, vice president for museum exhibits, learning, and engagement at Selby Gardens, to begin the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer, and welcome all. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm here at Selby Gardens with a panel of participants to kick off this wonderful program. We've had more than 350 people register for this program, so I just want to let you know that we can hear and see you, but you can't, you can hear and see us, but we can't hear and see you. So if you'd like to participate, we need you to use the chat function. Some of you have been doing so already. What I'd love to do is find out where people are tuning in from. So if you'd be willing to, in the chat feature, go ahead and tell us where you're coming from, especially if you're out of town. So our presentation today is going to be 1 part PowerPoint slideshow presentation, 1 part video, and 1 part panel discussion. And we should wrap up right around 1:15. We apologize for the late start, but we had some technical difficulties getting this all set up. Some of you may have joined our program last October, which kind of kicked off a whole initiative to capture oral histories from our community, working with Vicki Oldham and Newtown Alive. So that initial program started out with the history of Limas Dixon Jr., the late Limas Dixon Jr., and the stories that he had to tell about his father, who was the foreman here for the Selbys for 40 years. We're going to hear a little bit from Limas again today, but we'll also hear from some other individuals whose families lived on this property and worked for the Selbys and the Paynes. So I wanted to just say that as a garden, we ground all of our programs in a mission of preserving, protecting, and celebrating life on the planet. And it's through that lens that we offer this program today, honoring the stories of the people who lived here and worked here and their families. And with that, I'm going to share some pictures. So as I mentioned, there's our agenda for the day. And this is a picture of the Selbys, William and Marie Selby, from about 1908. We think this is right around the time when they got married. This is a picture of the Paynes. Both of these families lived here on this property. And so those are the stories that we're going to hear about today. Right here, this is Christy and Ann Payne. That was his first wife, who built the Payne Mansion in 1934. And I want to show you the two different houses that you find today on the property of what is today the downtown Sarasota campus of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens. On the left is the Selby house, which they built in the kind of classic Mediterranean revival tradition of the 1920s in Sarasota. And on the right is the Payne Mansion, which Christy and Ann Payne built as their retirement home in 1934. They were neighbors. And the stories that you're going to hear today are about two different homes and two different families, and really two different ways of being. And I think you'll understand that as we get a little deeper into the program. I also want to just clarify that the Gardens purchased actually the Payne Mansion in 1973. So after Christy Payne passed away, his second wife, Helen, whom some of you may know of because the children's first daycare in Newtown is named after her, the Helen R. Payne Day Nursery. Helen moved across the street into what is today the Botany building, and the Polks moved in. The Polks, I think Dr. Polk was a dentist in town. So the Gardens was established after Mrs. Selby's death in 1971. And by 1973, this property, the Payne Mansion, her neighbor, that property came up for sale. Now, Dr. Carl Lohr, who is our founding botanist and Mrs. Selby's surgeon, knew the Polks and came over to the Polks and said, we would really like to purchase this property, but they couldn't afford the price tag. So at the time, the Polks were asking $250,000, which is the equivalent of 1.5 million today. So Dr. Lohr actually talked the Polks down a little bit to 175. Dr. Lohr put up $50,000 and the Selby Foundation kicked in the rest. That's another point I want to make, is that I think a lot of people think the Selby Foundation and Selby Gardens are the same thing. So the foundation got the money and the gardens got the land, to put it simply. So we can apply to that foundation just like anybody else can in town. So it was with that in 1973 that the Gardens acquired the Payne Mansion, which became the Museum of Botany and the Arts, which is the building we enjoy today as displaying artwork. Now, these three individuals are people who worked for the Selbys. On the left, we've got Miss Juanita Hamilton, who was her live-in and cook for the last 20 years of her life. In the center is Mr. Grover Yancey, who was Mrs. Selby's gardener for 50 years. And on the right is Mr. Limas Dixon, and he was essentially the foreman of the property for about 40 years. So you're going to hear some of their stories and stories from their descendants today. These pictures are of Miss Effie Blue. She was the cook in the Payne Mansion, also a live-in and a longtime companion of Helen Payne. Now, Ken Waters is with us today, and he's the grandson of Effie Blue, and he grew up in the Payne Mansion. And so he has all kinds of great stories to tell about his experiences there and on this property. Oh, and I should mention that this is the car and the home that Mrs. Payne bought for Effie. On the left is Mr. and Mrs. Mose Carter. Mose was the driver and the butler and worked for the Payne Mansion, the Payne family. And on the right is Mose Carter with Melvin Roberts. We're going to hear from some of their descendants today as well. And now I'd like to introduce Vicki Oldham. I think many of you know Vicki, but she's a wonderful storyteller, comes from a journalism background, and has this fabulous initiative called Newtown Alive. So I'm going to turn it over to Vicki right now.
We wanted to start out with Troy Nichols, and he may very well join us before this program is over. Troy is our Freedom Song leader. Yes, we do a lot of singing on those trolley tours that we talked about. Well, we didn't talk about it yet, but we sing for uplift and we sing to convey messages. So since Troy didn't start out with the singing, guess what? We're going to sing This Little Light of Mine together. Everybody in this room and those of you who are out in the audience, you ready? This little light of mine, I'm going to lead it. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All around my community, all around my community. I'm gonna let it shine all around my community. I'm gonna let it shine all around my community. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Okay, that's a great way to start a program, right? Troy, I hope you're somewhere and are going to come on this call. Anyway, Selby Gardens is a very, very special place to me. It's special because of the Newtown residents who worked these grounds and planted the banyan trees, and they played, as you will hear Ken Waters and Walter Gilbert talking about, and also Ken lived on these grounds. I am proud to say that this relationship with Selby Gardens and its administration started long before the George Floyd incident happened, long before organizations and institutions began to release statements about the importance of diversity. And I'm really, really proud of that. We saw a need to tell these stories on the grounds, and that is exactly what we began to do last year. So I want you to meet our speakers. We have Reverend Kenneth Waters joining us today. He's from Tampa. He operates a food pantry business within his church. He is a retired caterer, and his grandmother, whom you have heard from. There's Ken smiling. He has a beautiful smile. Anyway, Mrs. Effie Blue was his grandmother, and she was a wonderful cook. I think Ken brought some goodies here today, and if you were here, you would be able to taste them, but maybe we can twist his arm to share a recipe. Carolyn Yancey is on the call with us today. She is Grover Yancey's niece. She is a retired educator from the Sarasota School District. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for being out there virtually. We have Walter Gilbert. He is the Director of Community Engagement here at the Selby Gardens, and he is also a VP at Newtown Alive. He is our veteran community scholar. I don't go any place, or try not to go any place, without him. He's leading a lot of outreach projects for us, and he is the past Sarasota NAACP president. And also we have Beverly Carter with us. She is on the faculty at the college, in the College of Education at Union Institute and University. She worked at Miami-Dade and Broward County in the public school system. Her parents were Mose and Elmira Carter, and she lives in Pembroke Pines. So how did this Newtown Alive project start? Well, Newtown's history was available only in fragments. It was a sentence in a book, a paragraph in another, a photo with a cut line, but nothing was collected comprehensively. So that's when the city of Sarasota contracted my team to begin to tell Newtown's 100 years of history. And so I gathered volunteers and experts, and we went out into the community looking for photographs and letters and documents. And boy, did we find a lot of information. We also found these pictures, these watercolor paintings that you're seeing. They are at the William Hartman Gallery on Palm Avenue. These photographs, no, these paintings are very important because back in the 50s, not many people in our community had cameras, but artists would go out into the community and set up a canvas, and they would paint street scenes, what they saw. And these paintings give us an idea of what the community looked like back in the 50s. And you see a prom gown from a student at Booker High School from the 50s. But yes, we gathered documents and we wrote a lot of information. We designed, we launched websites, we posted and pitched and published. These are some of the historic markers that are throughout the Newtown community. There are 15 of them arranged in themes, not chronological order. I wish that you will be able to come with us on a trolley tour when we're able to, when this darn pandemic has left us, and hopefully it will. We have the Newtown Alive book and mobile app that you're seeing. And also right now we are working on opening an art center and historic house and museum. And hopefully you'll be able to come and enjoy our offerings, exhibitions, and we're partnering with institutions such as Selby. Jennifer mentioned our Highwayman exhibit that is, we are going to mount the summer of 2021. So with that, and these are pictures of some of the trolley tours that we've had. But with this, we're going to start some videos that we collected. Now, Selby Gardens recorded these videos with us, in partnership with us. I did not have the stories of the descendants of the Black residents who worked these grounds. Limas Dixon Jr. started telling these stories when he would come with us on trolley tours. And I listened, and I had never heard these stories before. And I asked Limas more about them. I'm like, really? Did those things really happen? And he said, yes. I said, we've got to tell Selby Gardens about this. I don't think that they know about these stories. We called the Selby Foundation. They recorded Limas's story, and the other video clips that you're going to hear, Selby Gardens recorded those. So I want to give you a little flavor about what life was like for the workers here in the gardens. And then we'll come back on the other side of those video clips. I'll ask them a few questions, and then we'll open up the floor for your questions if you have any. Okay? Here we go with the videos, starting out with Limas.
My father was Limas James Dixon Sr. My mother was Ida Mae Dixon. My father worked for the Selbys for probably 40 plus years. Downtown Sarasota, there, when you went shopping, there were places like 5 and 10 and Crest, and they had the colored and white water fountains and restrooms. One with nice cold water and the other one for the color that just had tap water. Uncle Bill wouldn't let us drink out of the colored water fountain. He would say, boy, get you some of that good cold water. She was a kind, soft-spoken, beautiful lady. And she loved that property. She loved that property. She would buy big 50-pound bags of peanuts just to feed the squirrels. Because she loved to sit almost anywhere from the property other than if you were in the water, you could see her sitting there. That was our playground. The property was our playground. In the big banyan trees, we used to swing on the vines, carve our names and our little girlfriend names in the trees.
The Payne property wasn't as big as the Selbys property, but there were lots of trees to climb. Lots of snakes back in the day, yeah. Yeah, that was quite interesting. Yeah, lots of birds. I got to learn a lot of the birds, different birds, like the mockingbirds, the blue jays, the robins. I just learned a lot of the things that they would do. And I would just study nature. Yeah.
In a book or?
No, open nature. I would just walk and just study and just watch the birds, watch the squirrels. Yeah. It was a lot of fun.
You weren't afraid of the snakes?
Absolutely, I was. Yeah, if
What
I
would
saw
you
a
do?
snake, I would run. Yeah. There were only like little black snakes, rat snakes. I never saw any that I know of, any poisonous snakes. Didn't stick around to notice.
Grandmother drove you to Booker High School in a Cadillac.
Yes.
Describe
The
that.
Paynes had a Cadillac, brand new, and we would get up and she would take me to school at Booker. She would drive right up. That's when the kids made fun of me. Yeah. Little rich kid. That lasted about 4 or 5 months. And then I asked my grandmother to drop me off right around by the projects, and I walked to school with the rest of the kids. Yeah.
Do you remember the color of the caddy?
It was a black Cadillac. Yeah. Like a chauffeur's car. It was, they were always black. And she would get a new car just about every 2 years, every 3 years, she would get a car. And she would buy my grandmother a car. Yes. She would buy my grandmother a brand new car every 2 or 3 years. When she got a new car, she bought one for my grandmother.
Describe some of your experiences on the property with the Dixons and knowing Limas and the Selbys and the Paynes.
Yes, the Selbys and Limas Dixon. I remember the first time meeting Mr. Selby. When I found out that Lima's father was working, so I went down to see my friend. And Mr. Selby, he just took us out on his boat. He knew that my grandmother was working, and I was there, living there. And that's how we got together, Limas and I. That's from little kids. He used to take us out on his boat. At least several times during the summer, he would take us out. And that was so much fun. And I would walk between the yards and meet up with Limas. Yeah, that was so much fun.
That joyriding on the bay with Mr. Selby. What did you do on the boat?
That was the experience of my life. I had never been on a boat. I remember the first time I was a little afraid. I didn't know what was going to happen to us. We would fish, and we'd just go out, and he would dock somewhere. I can't remember if it was longboat or Lido. I don't know where he would dock, but we would go out and play, and he would just bring us back real slowly. You know, we'd stop and fish, and it was just so much fun. That's the first where I learned how to fish. It was just the three of us. Mr. Selby, my good friend Limas, and I. Limas was a little serious kid back then, but he was so much fun. I really can't remember any of the conversations. It was just so much fun being out on the water. It was so much fun riding in a boat. It was just so much fun being with Limas on this. Yeah, so as kids, we just had fun.
The antics of you and Ken Waters.
Well, like I say, the Payne Mansion was a stricter location when we were out there. Like I said, we could be outside, but we couldn't be like outside close to the house, like running around playing. When we was inside, we had to be in that room. And sometimes we spent the night there. And there was a tree right next to that window that you could get in out the window and onto that tree and down to the ground. So sometimes we did that, and we would do that. And the closeness to downtown allowed us to get out down that tree. We would walk around downtown for an hour, 30 minutes or so, and come back and climb the tree and get back in the room. Because Miss Effie did bed checks. It must have been when the time of year when it got dark the earliest that I could recall doing this, because Mrs. Payne, the family, they went to bed like early. You know, they wasn't like now TV and all the stuff you can do now. So they went to bed early, so that meant everybody had to go to bed. So so it had to be 6, 7 o'clock, you know. It was Kenneth's fault. Believe me, it wasn't my fault. I was a follower, because he was out. He was there most of the time. just like going with Mr. Dixon, this was their place, you know. It was when I was spending the night with Kenny that I could come out here and be with them, because wherever they went, I had to go. So he did it. He knew how to do it.
Were you a little bit afraid?
I was a little bit afraid. I was always afraid of getting caught, because I know once I get caught, what was going to happen. It wasn't going to be a good. Miss Effie was going to get me first. Then when she told Mama, I was going to get it again. So yeah, I was always nervous. But Kenny would always say, "Man, don't worry about it. I do it all the time." So yeah.
Very quiet, but he always worked. He was a hard worker. And he started out working, from what I can remember, at Sarasota Jungle Gardens. And Mrs. Selby saw him working there, and she brought him here. He's the one who planted the banyan trees. And there is an area out there that's called Grover Yancey Banyan Tree Garden. So he worked real hard. He was a hard worker, and he loved what he did. He stayed here about 50 years probably.
What were the circumstances that led you to Selby Gardens?
The only time I came to visit was before integration, was when I came back to Sarasota after college, and he would, if they had a party or Christmas party or something, I would be his date. So that's the only time I would come. We never came to visit otherwise. Oh, it was nice. We were the only African Americans there, of course.
How did he learn gardening?
Self-taught, you know, because back during that time, most people couldn't read that much, or you didn't have that information available for you to read. I think he just taught himself. That's what he's always done. He left Jungle Gardens and came to Selby Gardens. So, and he was proud of his work. He brought me some orchids at one time. I kept them for a long time. I didn't know how to take care of them. He told me what to do, but I didn't follow directions.
What was it like to see these two worlds?
When you would come out here on these grounds or go to Mrs. Payne Mansion, and then when you go home, you know, you look around your neighborhood and you would see nothing similar, nothing close. And, you know, as a young kid, you wonder, why is that? Because at that age, you don't know the history, you don't know what made those things the way they were, but you just was wondering, because I'm looking, I'm like, the only difference I see is that they're white and we're black. So, but that to me should not have been a difference. So I was trying to reconcile that in my brain on, there's got to be something else other than that. But come to find out, that's basically the difference. You know, as you grow older, you come to realize that's the bottom line in a lot of respects.
Who were some of the other African American people from Newtown that you saw or remembered seeing here? You mentioned Miss Juanita Hamilton.
Mm-hmm. Miss Hamilton was Mrs. Selby's maid, if you want to call it that. See, I hate calling these people like Mrs. Hamilton and Mrs. Blue, these people maids, because they were so much more than that. You know, they actually ran these people's lives. They managed their lives, you know. So I guess in today's world, they would be a personal assistant, something of that nature. But, you know, they were way more than their maids and stuff like that. Over at Selby, because their grounds were so big, they actually had a crew of people working here. One of the people I remember is Mr. Grover Yancey, quiet man who, you know, he was always working. When we were out, when I would see him, he was always working. You know, you see some other people standing around and stuff, but he was always working.
Do you remember Mrs. Selby?
When you compare the two, you compare her and Mrs. Payne, they were two different individuals, which most people are different, but Mrs. Selby was more down to earth, I would say. I can remember seeing her in boots. I wouldn't say she had on jeans at the time, but she wasn't dressed up as you would say. She just wore common everyday work clothes, you would say, because she was out on the grounds with the guys a lot, showing them what to do and how to do it. And when she was showing what and how, she was actually doing it to show how and what. When I was around with Kenneth over at the Payne Mansion, she would be more dressed up, you know, and she would walk in and give Miss Effie orders and leave and go away. So they were two different people as far as relating to other people, I think.
Okay.
Like I say, I get a more friendly vibe with Mrs. Selby and her people, and I get a more boss lady vibe from Mrs. Payne and her attitude toward people that worked for her. When we went there, there was an entrance that we used. It was off from the pantry through the kitchen. We usually were in that room, in that area. Sometimes Kenny, Miss Effie, and Kenny stayed overnight a lot there. And if I was with them, I had to stay too. And she had this room that we had to stay in. And you know, since I've been working over there, I go to that room and I was like, this was a closet. This was actually a closet that we were in. But no, you couldn't go move around the house at all. You stayed in those two places.
School integration was an intense time and challenging.
That was a challenging time for us. A lot of us were angry. A lot of us were curious. A lot of us had expectations of continuing on at Booker because it had such great tradition. We had the #1 basketball team, the #1 band. Our chorus was one of the best in the state also. So there was a lot of anger there. There was a lot of anger. And when we found out that we were going to be integrated at such a late time in the summer, at least when I found out, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready, and I didn't want to leave any of that because I had great expectations being in the band. I wanted to be the next drum major. And we boycotted. We boycotted, yes.
You were allowed to boycott?
Yeah.
Your grandmother allowed you?
Yes, my grandmother allowed me. As a matter of fact, my grandmother insisted that I boycott. And she was one of the mothers that helped and brought the food to the children, because we had school in the churches, and she was one of the ones that would, along with Miss Atkins, Miss Gilbert, some of the teachers, they really, really united, you know, for the kids, that we continue in education. And I can remember my grandmother would never let me know because she got fired for helping, for contributing, for standing up for us, for our rights.
Say that again, Ken.
For standing up for our rights, for contributing to the community, you know, because she wanted us to be united, and it affected the parents too, so much. Yeah, because their kids were being bused, and they didn't like that. So when Mrs. Payne, Miss Helen Payne, found out that my grandmother was contributing by cooking and being a part of the community, she got fired. Yeah, she got fired.
How did your grandmother feel about that, or did she say anything to you?
She did not say anything to me. She did not. She kept it in. And I would always wonder why did she change jobs? Because now she was working with Miss Ruth Gilbert, and they were buddies. They were tight. They were buddies.
My mother at the time was working on Main Street at a store called the Surrey Dress Shop, and my mother and Mrs. Blue was friends. You know, they like I said, we was always at each other's homes. And I came home and Mrs. Effie came over, and you know, in those times when grown people talk, you're supposed to leave the room. You definitely didn't get in the conversation. But I could tell when she came there, she was upset. So I didn't go too far so I could hear what it was they was getting ready to talk about. And Miss Effie was crying, and she was totally distraught. The fact that Mrs. Payne had fired her.
Why do you think it's important that these stories are told?
Well, being a history guy like I am, I love history. And I've, over the years, you know, read books on Sarasota history, and you hear about the Ringlings and the Palmers, people of that nature that came to Sarasota and did great things and put Sarasota on the map. But there's always another group that helped make that happen. And their contribution, while they may not have had all this money and been able to build mansions and stuff, their contribution was just as great because they actually built those people's dreams. There was their dreams, but it was their work that made it happen. And you could relate that to the black people experience here in the United States on the greater scale, as far as who built this country, you know, who made all this possible for people to have those mansions and things of that nature. So it's the same thing.